How 91 felony charges boosted Trump's standing in the GOP. Interviews in multiple states show that Trump's constant message of victimhood has seeped in with voters. David Alexander, an engineer who attended the Iowa Faith and Freedom Dinner last month, called the absent Donald Trump arrogant and egotistical while praising a raft of other Republican presidential candidates who attended. But he doesn't blame Trump for skipping the event, and figures the former president is busy defending himself from indictments on 91 criminal charges. The beating Trump has taken is a key part of his appeal, Alexander said. The people that don't like him. When they dislike him, it helps me like him more, said Alexander, 61, who called Trump his top choice in the 2024 nominating contest. If they ignored him, I probably wouldn't like him as much. Does that make sense? After Trump was charged with 91 felony counts in 4 separate cases for allegedly mishandling classified information, obstructing justice, conspiring to overturn the 2020 election and falsifying business records in connection to hush money paid to an adult film star, the Republican Party seems more wedded to him than ever before. Trump also faces an ongoing civil trial in New York over alleged business fraud by him and his company. Instead of voters turning on him because they are appalled by his behavior, fearful he would not be electable or exhausted by his perpetual drama, the indictments have boomeranged to his favor among Republicans, according to voters, polls, strategists in rival campaigns and Trump advisors. Interviews with scores of voters in multiple states show that Trump's constant message of victimhood has seeped in not just among the Trump faithful, but also among center-right voters who were previously skeptical of him. Many of the voters echoed his long-running attacks on the law enforcement system that he has sharply ratcheted up in recent months. In many cases, Republicans who said they were initially interested in another candidate more than Trump were dismissive of the seriousness of the charges. Some said they believed Trump had made mistakes, but they contend there was an unfair double standard against him. In March, when Trump was indicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records in New York over hush payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels, a Washington Post polling average of the GOP primaries had Trump with a 14 percentage point lead over Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. In June, after a federal grand jury indicted Trump on 40 counts over classified documents and obstructing justice, Trump's polling primary lead that month grew to 30 points over DeSantis, 53% to 23%. Trump's lead grew again after he was indicted in both Washington and Georgia over his role in trying to overturn the election, to 41 percentage points over DeSantis. Currently, the Post average shows him ahead 57% to 14% over DeSantis, a gap of 43 percentage points. Trump also benefited from missteps by DeSantis, whose support has fallen 18 points since March. He's multiplied his support here with indictment after indictment. He's got better polling numbers because people don't trust the government, said Ketan Dawson, a former state party chairman in South Carolina who is backing former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley in her presidential bid. What's not surprising, Republican strategists and GOP operatives say, is Trump's biggest supporters would back him no matter what. He famously said he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not face consequences. What is different, according to rival campaigns, is that voters they once believed were persuadable now seem less so. What many in the party fear is that the indictments and civil lawsuits, along with a slew of trials in which allies and current and former advisors highlight damaging information about him on the witness stand, could damage Trump in a general election. Some of the party's leaders have already begun gaming out a nightmare scenario. He becomes the presumptive nominee and is then convicted of multiple felonies that turn off independent voters, suburban women and other voting blocs where Trump has traditionally struggled. Months of trial coverage filled with testimony from his own advisors could also sap his numbers in a general election. Some rival campaigns assert that the indictments have already shrunk Trump's ceiling, meaning the highest number of voters he could get in a GOP nominating contest is less than 50% now. Trump's advisors, however, note recent polls that show him above 50% in the primaries and tied or ahead of President Biden in a general election matchup. Americans know this is a witch hunt against President Trump to interfere with the 2024 election, Trump spokesman Stephen Chung said. His support has never been stronger, and that's why he's leading the primary election by wide margins and beats Joe Biden in the general. Those who say this is a nightmare scenario are actively aiding and abetting Biden and the Democrats, who will do everything, including weaponizing the justice system, to prevent President Trump from taking back the White House. It's baked in. GOP voter sentiment toward the indictments has shaped the responses of Trump's challengers, who have privately grappled with how aggressively to take him on. Many 2024 foes privately view his criminal liability as fodder for sharp attacks on him, but have watched as the Republican base has seemingly rewarded him for being repeatedly indicted and how Republican crowds have often booed when Trump is criticized. In August, Fox News anchor Bret Baier seemed to apologize to the audience at the first Republican debate for even mentioning the indictments. As the crowd booed, he urged them to quiet down so they could quickly get through the indictments part of the debate. DeSantis advisors said he has declined to attack Trump over the criminal cases, with the exception of some oblique jabs this spring, in part because they've made Trump more popular with the GOP. One person close to DeSantis said the campaign viewed each indictment as annoying because it knew there would be a flurry of new polls that showed Trump gaining more ground. People close to DeSantis said they concluded it was smarter to attack Trump on policy issues, such as for not finishing the border wall, for astronomically growing the federal deficit during his presidency, and for attacking DeSantis and other Republican governors for signing bills to ban abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. A DeSantis spokesman pointed to the governor's comments that charges against Trump were politically motivated. Businessman and presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy has called for other Republicans to vow to pardon Trump and has said he believes Trump should not have been charged. Others like former Vice President Mike Pence have tried a two-step, arguing his conduct disqualifies him to serve as president again but also questioning the need for criminal prosecutions. Among the main candidates vying for the nomination, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has stood apart for his unflinching criticism of Trump for his alleged crimes. Christie has attracted never-Trump donors and supporters with his scathing critiques of the former president and has climbed in some polls but still trails Trump and others in the field. He did not respond to requests for comment. At first, Trump advisors were concerned by the prospect of criminal charges, according to 5 people close to the former president, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to reveal internal details. But the New York case related to payments to Daniels was seen as particularly weak by Republicans and many legal critics, and campaign advisors were pleasantly surprised by how many Republicans defended him after subsequent indictments. Since then, Trump and his advisors have demanded that other Republicans come out in support of Trump against the indictments, even as Trump attacks the other candidates. As for the other candidates, their silence is deafening and the American people will never forget how they refused to fight for the rule of law, Chung, the Trump spokesman, said. The former president has made sharp, and often false, attacks against law enforcement agencies one of the centerpieces of his 2024 campaign message. The former president's team broadly views the classified documents case in Florida as the most perilous, but the confluence of indictments has allowed him to cast himself as a victim, a place where he feels politically comfortable, and raise significant amounts of money. Much of his campaign is now about taking on prosecutors and the Justice Department, and his advisors say he will continue to ratchet up the attacks on the justice system as he faces multiple trials next year. Now, it's baked in, one Trump advisor said, adding that fundraising usually spiked after Trump was newly indicted. We just don't even hear it anymore. John Nish, an engineering manager from Truro, Iowa, said he is wrestling with his 2024 choice. He may back DeSantis on caucus day if he thinks attacks on Trump have rendered him unelectable. But the more Trump comes under fire, he said, the more energized he is about Trump. The closer a person is to God, and the more that they're trying to do to fulfill God's plans, and do the right thing, the more Satan attacks him, Nish said of Trump. In a series of focus groups conducted by the Anti-Trump Republican Accountability Project and reviewed by The Post, South Carolina voters who named someone besides Trump as their first 2024 choice became instantly defensive of Trump when asked about indictments. A jury could very well find him guilty, and he may very well be guilty, but why are they going after him and not everybody else, a voter named Larry said in a June focus group, after the charges over hush money in New York and the mishandling of classified documents in Florida. If they're going to go after him, I want to see him go after the Clintons, and I want to see him go after Biden. The fact that they're just going after Trump, I don't believe that this should be happening. Another participant, Chip, compared Trump's prosecution to the insider trader conviction of Martha Stewart in 2004. She was made to be the example, he said. It's kind of like being the one kid in school and literally everybody did it, and they said, well, it's not about them, did you do wrong? Well, there's a pretty good chance it's going to show that he did do wrong, technically. But there's nothing you can do about justifying the being singled out. A participant named Cheyenne said, most of us are just so sick to death and have become deaf because of the constant crucifixion of Trump, and this has gone on now for so many years that we just don't even hear it anymore. They've just got him under a microscope. They're just following him around waiting for the next thing they can pin on him. For a while, New Jersey Attorney Joe Marino thought DeSantis was the best choice for president in 2024. DeSantis was performing, he said. Then, Trump's indictment changed things. I would have preferred DeSantis, he said. But I have to support Trump because we have to gain back our country. I only switched over to support Trump because indicting him is an outrage and threatens democracy. DeSantis has echoed Trump's attacks on a so-called deep state within the federal bureaucracy, while also arguing that he would be more effective at combating it and that Trump missed opportunities to do so. DeSantis has said he would dramatically downsize agencies and fire leaders without hesitation. Don Tapia, a longtime Arizona GOP donor who served as a U.S. ambassador to Jamaica under Trump, said that all of the indictments against the former president have helped drive Republicans like him back to Trump's corner. Not so long ago, Tapia hoped that Trump's GOP rivals could make a credible case to primary voters that it was time to look forward, not backward. Tapia had grown frustrated with Trump's conduct, he said. But no other GOP candidate has stood out, and a raft of charges against Trump have made him look sympathetic to him. We're not a third world country, and we see these things happen in third world countries, said Tapia, 85, who lives in the Phoenix area. I think on both sides of the aisle, you're seeing more people turn towards Trump because of all these indictments. Tim Boyle, a conservative-leaning voter from Arizona, said he had been looking for an alternative to the former president, a younger, better-looking and less obnoxious person. Boyle, who is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020 because he was confident that he would appoint conservative justices to the Supreme Court that would oppose abortion. But he disliked some of Trump's rhetoric and policies on immigration, he said. Even as he ponders voting for a Democrat in 2024, he said, the indictments made him feel sympathy for Trump. When he was president, they impeached him twice, Boyle said. I'm kind of getting the same feeling about the indictments. Is this just the next thing they're going to start doing, indicting presidents? I guess I don't think they're real, I think they're more political theater. It does make me think, okay, there's been something afoot this whole time. If Trump is powerless against the government, what chance does any of us have? Emily Guskin contributed to this report. Mitt Romney urges his donors to coalesce behind one challenger to Trump. Park City, Utah, alarmed by the dominance of Donald Trump less than 100 days before the Iowa caucuses, Senator Mitt Romney, Republican, Utah, urged an influential group of his one-time campaign donors to help narrow the GOP field to one viable challenger who can face off against the former president for the nomination. Romney, one of the most outspoken Republican critics of Trump, addressed his longtime financial backers at a gathering in Park City less than a month after announcing that he will not run for re-election next year. Free from those constraints, he did not mince words when describing the dysfunction in his party just days after Representative Kevin McCarthy, California, was ousted as House Speaker by a faction of far-right Republicans led by Representative Matt Gaetz, FLA, a Trump acolyte. I think our party has multiple personality disorder, and I think the Democratic Party does as well, the 2012 Republican presidential nominee said Tuesday during a fireside chat with his former running mate, Paul D. Ryan. I think we're schizophrenic. We don't know what we are or what we stand for within our party. The policy gathering, known as the E2 Summit, so named for experts and enthusiasts, was launched by Romney a decade ago, before he became a U.S. Senator, and has been helmed by Ryan since 2019. In a wide-ranging discussion that touched on what the U.S. role should be in the conflict between Hamas and Israel, as well as the threats to the United States posed by China, Russia, and Iran, both Romney and Ryan expressed concern about the GOP's ability to grapple with those complex issues. Romney said he told Ryan that he had no clear answer when Ryan asked him what the conservative movement would look like after Trump. Ryan touched on his own concern that the party is now driven by populism untethered to principles and more frequently tethered to the cult of Donald Trump's personality. The former House Speaker defined the Republican Party's problem as such: a guy, he's 77 years old, and he's got like 91 counts, and he's got a shelf life. Hopefully it's February, but maybe it's a little longer, Ryan said, alluding to the dozens of criminal charges Trump faces in multiple trials next year. Earlier in the day, the group heard from 4 of the contenders vying for the Republican presidential nomination: Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Chris Christie, and Doug Burgum, in sessions that were closed to the press. Ryan on Tuesday night asked Romney to pinpoint how soon donors would have to coalesce around one candidate, essentially forcing lower-tier candidates from the race to avoid the train wreck coming that would be Trump clinching the GOP nomination. With Trump maintaining a wide lead in polls of the GOP race, Romney acknowledged that a train wreck is the most likely scenario, but not necessary. Speaking as a former presidential nominee, Romney said it would be difficult for the candidates to bow out of the race even if they believed it was in the best interest of the country. Narrowing the field, he argued, will hinge on the willingness of the donors who are financing them to say it's time to step aside. Romney predicted that multiple candidates will try to stay in the race for the early contests in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, though some will run out of money before then. He said he viewed the end of February as D-Day. "I'd like it to coalesce earlier, I just think it has to happen," Romney said. "I want to put responsibility on your shoulders as the people who are financing campaigns to have some say as to when it's time for the person you support to say, okay, I'm getting behind someone else." In an interview with the Washington Post previewing his decision not to run for re-election in Utah, Romney said he was concerned about how difficult it had become for the U.S. House to operate. He also expressed his dissatisfaction with the potential choice before voters in the general election, stating that President Biden is unable to lead on important matters and Trump is unwilling to lead on important matters. He elaborated on those thoughts Tuesday night after all-day policy sessions at the E2 Summit, which was organized by the private equity firm known as Solomir Capital, founded by Eric Scheuerman, Romney's former finance chair Spencer Zwick and Tag Romney, Mitt Romney's son. Ryan is one of Solomir's partners. Explaining his decision to leave the Senate, Romney noted that words such as bipartisan and compromise had become anathema to primary elections. In part because of the divisions in the House, he said, he had concluded that there would be far fewer opportunities to effectively move legislation with the small bipartisan group of colleagues that he has worked closely with, including Republican Senators Lisa Murkowski, Alaska, and Susan Collins, Maine, and Rob Portman, Ohio, who has since left the Senate, as well as Democratic Senators Joe Manchin III, W.Va, and John Tester, Montana, and Kyrsten Sinema, Arizona, a former Democrat turned independent. In the current political environment, Romney said, he did not think senators and House members would be able to solve his top 5 issues: addressing the emergence of China, reducing the nation's debt, parsing the threats posed by artificial intelligence, and tackling climate change and immigration. "Those issues will require presidential leadership," he said. "I'm going to work like crazy for whoever the next president is," he said, to see if I can't get that president to finally address these issues, because the clock is running out. Trump's anti-immigrant onslaught sparks fresh alarm heading into 2024. His comments have renewed concern from Latino leaders, civil rights groups, and experts on extremism, particularly as Trump has established a wide lead in polls of the Republican primary. Donald Trump has denigrated undocumented immigrants in recent weeks by accusing them of poisoning the blood of our country, associating them with drug and alcohol use, and portraying them as dangerous threats to Americans, prompting widespread criticism and denunciations of racism and xenophobia from immigrant and civil rights groups. During a recent rally in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the former president said, "These people are very aggressive, they drink, they have drugs, a lot of things happening." In Dubuque, Iowa, last month, he told his audience, "It's the blood of our country, what they're doing is destroying our country." And in New Hampshire on Monday, Trump baselessly accused immigrants crossing the Mexican border of being involved in the recent attacks on Israel. "People are pouring into our country, and we have no idea from where they come," he said. Disparaging many immigrants and embracing hardline border policies are tactics that have long been central to Trump's political identity and governing agenda, dating to his first campaign speech in 2015. Trump's recent comments, coming as President Biden has struggled to contain an increase in illegal crossings at the southern border, reflect the ex-president's effort to put the border and immigration at the forefront of his bid to return to the White House. His at times escalating attacks have energized his base of supporters while prompting a growing wave of alarm from immigrant advocates, particularly as Trump is the clear polling leader in the race for the GOP nomination. Domingo Garcia, president of the League of United Latin American Citizens, the oldest Hispanic civil rights group in the country, said that Trump's comments about blood indicate his language is getting more extreme, comparing it to Nazi propaganda about Jewish people, and that more people should be paying attention ahead of the 2024 election. He appears to be taking pages from the Hitler-Nazi playbook and using them in this production to divide Americans and engage in tribalism, Garcia said. And he's succeeding to a certain extent. Civil rights advocates and experts in extremism and immigration policy have compared Trump's poisoning the blood remark to language used by Adolf Hitler in his book Mein Kampf, in which he told Germans to care for the purity of their own blood by eliminating Jews. Trump launched his 2016 campaign by calling undocumented immigrants from Mexico rapists who are bringing drugs and crime into the country. As president, he signed an executive order limiting travel from several Muslim-majority countries that faced numerous court challenges, added new barriers along the southern border and drew backlash for his administration's policy that separated migrant families. Now, civil rights groups including the Anti-Defamation League, which fights anti-Semitism, and LULAC, are warning that his suggestion in a recent interview that undocumented immigrants coming across the southern border are poisoning the blood of our country could inspire violence against minorities and reflects rhetoric used by white nationalists. John Lewis, a research fellow at the Program on Extremism at George Washington University, said that poisoning language has directly appealed to people in the past who have gone on to commit violence against minorities, citing the El Paso and Tree of Life synagogue mass shooters. These were both events that were driven by a deeply white supremacist, deeply anti-immigrant set of conspiracies and a coherent anti-immigrant worldview that was centered on dehumanizing the other, he said. And in this context, I think it's always going to be deeply concerning when we see the continued proliferation of what are openly white supremacist dog whistles that will likely inspire more individuals to engage in offline conduct targeting these communities. When asked about Trump's interview with the National Pulse, a right-leaning website, in which he made the poisoning comments, his campaign spokesperson Stephen Chung said, "That's a normal phrase that is used in everyday life, in books, television, movies, and in news articles. For anyone to think that is racist or xenophobic is living in an alternate reality, consumed with faux outrage." Across his campaign rallies, Trump devotes significant portions of his speeches to the border and to immigration, speaking in often exaggerated and graphic terms. He paints a bleak picture of the country, associating undocumented immigrants with gangs such as MS-13 and suggesting they're taking up educational resources in cities like Los Angeles. The Supreme Court ruled in 1982 that public school districts can't turn away students because they are undocumented. "We're going to have the largest deportation operation in history," he said to loud applause during a Saturday campaign event in Waterloo, Iowa. While Trump promised to deport millions during his first term, he was unable to do so because of resistance from Democratic state and local officials and budget and staffing shortages in immigration enforcement. 2 days later, in New Hampshire, the crowd cheered as Trump recounted a poem he often recites about a woman who aids a snake and is bitten, comparing immigrants seeking refuge in America to bloodthirsty reptiles. Angela Kelly, chief policy advisor at the American Immigration Lawyers Association and a former senior counselor for the Department of Homeland Security under Biden, said Trump repeating his ideas has normalized crude, false notions about immigrants that do not actually advance policy that would address the crisis. Advocates say migrants are fleeing violence, government repression, and poverty in hopes of a better life in the United States. Just because he repeats it doesn't make it any less dangerous, she said. While Trump has associated migrants with acts of violence, evidence has shown that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than native-born Americans. Trump's assertion in New Hampshire that those same people who just attacked Israel are coming into the United States is also false, analysts said. Alex Norast, who has studied crime and immigration data at the Cato Institute, testified before Congress last month that 9 foreign-born terrorists entered the country illegally from 1975 to last year, but only 3 of those people crossed the Mexican border, while the others came from Canada. And there is no evidence any Hamas-affiliated terrorist has crossed the southern border, either. There are many problems at the border, without exaggerating what we're seeing, Norast told the Washington Post. Promoting ideas to combat illegal immigration and drug trafficking has galvanized the Republican base in recent years, and candidates up and down the ballot have embraced variations of the positions and rhetoric Trump has exemplified. In the Republican primary this year, Trump and some of his rivals have championed militarily attacking cartels in Mexico. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has proposed using deadly force to combat drug smugglers breaching the border. It's gone one step further, and the tenor has changed as a result, Cristobal Ramon, an immigration senior policy advisor at the Latino advocacy organization Unidos US. The Republicans' ideas are resonating on the right, as migrant crossings of the U.S.-Mexico border have soared under the Biden administration. Administration officials said this month that they would fast-track the construction of new barriers along the border as well as reinstate direct deportation flights to Venezuela. The rise in migrants has led to increased criticism of the Biden administration from Democratic officials including New York Mayor Eric Adams and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. In interviews, attendees at the recent Trump events in Iowa and New Hampshire ranked the border as among their top issues of concern and said they agreed broadly with Trump's statements, even if some said they were not thrilled with his delivery. When asked what issue was most important, Vicki Gander, 72, a registered Republican in Iowa who is volunteering for Trump, responded, building the wall, because a lot of things are going to happen, bad things, and they're already happening. I mean, even the Democratic governors are upset. Craig Robinson, an Iowa-based GOP consultant, attributed the concern over the border to the nature of having presidential contests in Iowa frequently. That kind of drives this issue to the forefront more so, he said. Another factor, not to be overlooked, is while Iowa is in the middle of the country, we have immigration issues here because we're at the crossroads of Interstate 80 and 35. In 2021, there were about 11.2 million undocumented immigrants living within the United States, according to the Migration Policy Institute, the largest bump since 2015 after fewer people were crossing the border during the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. Census data showed that between 2019 and 2021, migration from Central America and Venezuela increased. Lane Solier, a 24-year-old tile worker, was one of thousands who piled into an auditorium in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, to hear the former president, whom he voted for before and said he would again. Solier said he agreed with the sentiment of Trump's comments because immigration has made it more difficult for him to earn a competitive wage, but he said Trump's remarks could be said with more tact. There are things that could be said better, he said. But you aren't voting for the way someone talks. You are voting for what they do. Ellen Casanello, who drove 7 hours from her home in New York to hear Trump speak, agreed with his comments on immigration, arguing that it isn't controversial to say migrants should come to the United States only if they have gone through the legal process. She added that she believes those criticizing Trump are only doing so because they don't want him to win the election. Maria Sacchetti contributed to this report. DeSantis reserves $2 million for Iowa ads amid tight cash reserves. The outlay, which can be modified over time, represents about 40% of the $5 million DeSantis's campaign said it had at the end of September for use in the primary. Ron DeSantis's presidential campaign is planning to hit the airwaves in Iowa for the first time next month, reserving $2 million for television commercials in the first-in-the-nation GOP caucus state that would consume much of his cash reserves. The $2 million outlay for ads starting in mid-November, which can be modified over time, represents about 40% of the $5 million DeSantis's campaign said it had at the end of September for use in the primary, a number that lags well behind what GOP polling leader Donald Trump's campaign has said it has in its coffers. In committing such a large share of its cash to advertising now, the campaign is redoubling its focus on Iowa and trying to send the message it can go the distance despite tight finances and a significant slide in the polls in recent months. DeSantis has fallen well behind Trump and has been overtaken by former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley in South Carolina and New Hampshire, according to some surveys. The DeSantis campaign has been forced to scale back its operation this year. For months, it wasn't clear that the Florida governor's campaign would have any TV budget as they scrimped and laid off staff. Much of the work traditionally handled on the campaign side, including ads, field organizing and candidate events, has been outsourced to Never Back Down, a super PAC that can raise and spend unlimited funds. DeSantis's ad reservation, first reported by NBC, runs through the Iowa caucuses January 15 and comes a week after the campaign announced that about a third of its staff would relocate to Iowa. The Florida governor's team is increasingly counting on a strong showing in Iowa to upend a race that Trump is dominating, usually leading the Florida governor by more than 40 points nationally and more than 30 points in Iowa. Trump has recently ramped up his travel to Iowa, which DeSantis's team has touted as a sign they are mounting a serious challenge there. DeSantis has also recently ramped up his attacks on Trump, broadly taking a more aggressive posture toward his rival than he had earlier this year. No one is working harder in Iowa to take their message directly to voters than Ron DeSantis, and this media reservation will complement the historic organization he has already built in the Hawkeye State, Campaign Communications Director Andrew Romeo said in a statement Thursday. DeSantis has promised to visit all of Iowa's 99 counties and as of this week had made it to 74. Campaign officials said they entered October with $5 million that can be used in the primary, despite a much larger overall haul, with much of their money coming from donors who have given the maximum allowed for both the primary and the general. That puts DeSantis in a tighter spot than rising rival Haley, whose campaign said it entered October with $9 million on hand available for the primary. And Trump, who dwarfs the field in small-dollar fundraising, finished the quarter with nearly $36 million, his team said. DeSantis's reservation comes a few days before campaign's financial reports for this year's third fundraising quarter become public, shedding new light on their donations and expenses. The DeSantis campaign's second quarter report revealed a high burn rate that advisors later acknowledged was unsustainable as they let go of more than a third of their staff and said they were working to bring down other costs. Campaign officials say they have gotten spending under control since then and raised $1 million in the 48 hours after disclosing their third quarter fundraising total, adding to their cash on hand. But it's not clear how much of that latest fundraising can be deployed in the primary. While Never Back Down has been airing ads in Iowa, super PACs pay steeper rates to place ads and cannot coordinate with the candidate they support on messaging. Campaign ads get DeSantis's message out more efficiently and allow the governor more control over it. Other candidates have already invested heavily in ads in Iowa but have struggled to gain traction. Sen. Tim Scott, Republican, South Carolina, who saw a bump in Iowa polls over the summer but remains in the single digits, has dedicated more than $7 million to airtime there, while a supportive super PAC has allotted more than $16 million, according to the tracking firm Ad Impact. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Republican, has roughly $2 million. Trump has dedicated only about $100,000 to Iowa ads this cycle, but a super PAC supporting him, MAGA Incorporated, has allotted about $6 million. A super PAC backing Haley has allotted nearly $9 million there. Never Back Down and the pro-Scott super PAC have reserved the most in airtime across the country this cycle, according to Ad Impact, more than $37 million apiece. MAGA Incorporated has allotted more than $28 mil. Biden team launches organizing pilot project in Wisconsin and Arizona. The re-election effort is focused on recruiting large numbers of volunteers to use their own relationships to spread the Biden message directly. President Biden's re-election effort will launch a pilot test of its 2024 organizing strategy in Wisconsin and Arizona next month, hiring about 24 staffers and opening a Milwaukee office with a new focus on digital and in-person outreach that aims to directly leverage the personal relationships of volunteers. The moves come as the Democratic National Committee has redirected its organizing efforts to a new smartphone app that encourages supporters to communicate with people in their own friend, family, and community circles and then report those contacts back to the party's voter file. This relational organizing has become a growing part of Democratic campaigns for several cycles, outperforming traditional door-knocking and call sheet lists that volunteers have long used to contact strangers during campaigns. But the scale of what the Biden campaign, in concert with the National Party, is planning for next year has not been attempted before. At the DNC, we can make phone calls and send texts and do a lot of cold calls and outreach, but we cannot cut through the noise in the same way you can, Meg DiMartino, the chief of staff for organizing at the National Party, told more than a dozen volunteers in a virtual training Wednesday. You cannot unsubscribe from your mom in the way you can unsubscribe from other organizations. The initial pilot program will constitute 4 efforts, targeting Latinos, African Americans, women and young people, initially focusing on the college communities in Wisconsin, the Black neighborhoods of Milwaukee and the vote-rich Phoenix metropolitan area. Biden advisors plan to closely monitor the effectiveness of the efforts in concert with existing advertising campaigns before expanding across the 7 major battleground states next year. At the heart of the new effort is a concern among Biden aides that the traditional methods of campaign communication, television ads, direct mail and voter contact from strangers, have lost some effectiveness in recent decades as voters have become more fed up with unsolicited appeals and spend more time consuming information on their phone, often over private text messaging chats or through networks such as TikTok that do not allow political ads. The goal of the program is to arm a nationwide network of Biden volunteers by next year with content they can share in these places, and to empower them to take action in their own social circles to get Biden re-elected and improve Democratic targeting data. I think we're really blurring the distinction between what online and offline organizing is, said Ramsey Reed, the Democratic National Committee state's director. There is absolutely a space for delivering content and campaign messaging through in-person communities and also through communities online, whether it's your Discord chat because you're a gamer, or whether it's your Peloton class that's virtual but you've got the same group of friends that always do it, or it's your PTA group, or your pickleball club. For months, the DNC has been distributing pro-Biden video, photos and graphics to supporters through an app called Greenfly, which can be shared with a single click into their social networks or other communities. In recent weeks, the party has encouraged those same supporters to switch to another app, called Reach, where they can find similar content to share while also uploading information to the party's voter file about the interests and concerns of their own networks. At a Wednesday DNC training for using Reach, Democratic volunteers who gathered over Zoom were encouraged to make lists of people they know personally who are forever Democrats and then to contact them directly as they normally would, through text message, for example, or Instagram direct message, asking if they would be interested in doing more to help Biden in 2024. Using the Reach app, they were then told to look up the same people in the voter file and record the outreach and any response, including their support for Biden. Democrats hope to use similar techniques in the battleground states with different populations of voters, including disengaged voters who may not vote next year. The goal is to have the campaign's messages about Biden accomplishments, his Republican opponent or voting logistics, be delivered directly from someone they know, who can then report back the reaction to the party number crunchers, who can use the data to improve their own targeting efforts. Such techniques have been used in recent elections with increasing frequency, and can be applied to in-person field work as well. Ben Wickler, the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, said the major strategic change is that organizers no longer have to work off lists of strangers provided by the campaign. Instead, they create their own lists, based on their personal social networks or location. He said organizers can now just walk into a bar, Wisconsin ranks among the highest in bars per capita, talk to 7 random people in a college community, and then report back the results of those interactions. The pilot starting next month will double the number of staff working on outreach to young and Black voters in the state. They also allow you to sit on your couch and check in with all the people you didn't see at church that weekend, Wickler said. Connecting with someone they have a relationship with is the most effective way to reach them. The program in the 7 major battleground states, which are expected to eventually include North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nevada, in addition to Arizona and Wisconsin, is expected to be built out by next spring, reaching its full strength in the final months of the campaign. By then, the Biden team is planning to launch a more traditional door-knocking effort as well. But the early efforts to recruit digital volunteers, both nationally and in the early swing states, could form a basis of that program. The last time a Democratic president ran for re-election, in 2012, the iPhone was only 5 years old, and the habits of digital communication were still largely based on desktop and laptop computers. President Barack Obama's campaign, which was based around neighborhood organizing groups, created its own app that year for door knockers to log their interactions with voters, and the campaign launched a late effort, targeted sharing, that encouraged people to upload their Facebook friend group and then communicate directly with those targeted by the campaign. Biden had an app in the 2020 election called Vote Joe that allowed volunteers to connect their phone contacts with the voter file. But next year's effort is expected to be more central to the overall campaign operation, people involved say. Research into how to restructure the Democratic field operation began in early 2022, directed by senior Biden advisors and funded by the DNC. The party is also working to build up an effort to recruit influencers in various communities to push the campaign's content, often through testimonials, into social media spaces. For an average volunteer who's using this tool who has an organizer who's following up with them every day on it, or for an average organizer working with a certain number of volunteers who are active on this platform, how many voter conversations are they having? Reed, the DNC state's director, said of the testing phase. What does that mean for the balance of investment and scale that we think we can achieve? During the training Wednesday night, one of many the party holds weekly, more than a dozen participants made a list of at least 57 people to contact, and had interactions with 18 over the course of an hour, with more expected to respond later. The organizers emphasized how much more efficient that effort could be than traditional door-knocking and cold calling, which is often an exercise in frustration given that voters have become less likely to pick up calls from numbers they don't recognize. Victor Rubio Rivera, a volunteer organizer with the DNC, asked volunteers during the training to compare their results with past experiences knocking on the doors of empty homes or being forced to leave voicemail messages. I have at times made 100+ calls, literally manually dialed calls, and talked to like 4 people with real conversations, he said. So this is absolutely incredible.